the women are stepping up.
Yeah.
The women are the ones showing up at the school board
better
meetings.
than us.
The women are the ones stepping up at the school board meetings. The women are the ones that are on the domestic terror list.
There are more men than the men.
When I go to the Capitol, it's the women there. It's like there's only a few men. So I want you to talk to the men because the fact of the matter is, nations don't rise and fall on the backs of the women. It's rises and falls on the backs of the men.
Yeah.
And that doesn't negate. It does not negate the importance of women. But we have a crisis right now of men, and the women know it too.
Yep.
So what advice do you have for the men? Or again, these guys are going out these things trying to learn to be men because they know they're not.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. I'll tell you, I will say this to all men out there and all young men. You got to choose right now to be a leader. You got to lead your wife, your children, your family, your state, your country. You got to choose right now to be a great father. You got to choose to be a leader at business and work and at church. You got to choose to be a good versus evil and make a stand and not be afraid to say it. I mean, you're going to take arrows in the back. It is not popular to be a leader. Oftentimes, I mean, so many times in my life, whether it was about talking about my religion and defending it or football and defending my dreams of playing the NFL, I was laughed at, I was spit on, I was hated. I've been hated for making stands for BYU and how they recruit in recently and been blackballed by friends. And I mean, you're always paying a price when you stand up, but stand up and do what is right and pay the price, because it is going to be good, true American men that save the United States of America, that return people to the fundamentals of our nation, of our Constitution, and the true principles of the Constitution of following God, our Creator, and our Savior, Jesus Christ. And stand for that. Stand for truth. Stand for what's right. Get in the face of evil and say it is absolutely wrong to allow biological men in our daughters' bathrooms and in their sports, and just breaking the law and allowing our borders to be open, risking the lives of our very wives and children in our nation. What are we doing? We've got to stand up and be Americans and lead our families.
Yeah, what's up, Utah? Welcome back to We Are the People Radio. This is your host, Jason Preston, with the man, Tom Haselton. What's up, brother?
What's up, buddy? Good to be back again.
Back in the saddle, kicking A.
Got a great show today.
We do. Let's. We're gonna jump right to it. This is a show that's pretty awesome because we've got a legend in here today, and he is a man that's left. Put it this way, it's someone I was as a child was like one of my ultimate heroes. So why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest?
Well, listen, we've got Jason Buck on the show today.
Yeah, buddy.
If I remember, he wore number 99 for the Cougars.
That's right.
Is that right?
That's right. That ages me because you're saying you were a little boy when you were watching me.
That's when I used to go to the games.
Right,
I used to go to the games with my dad, and it was Jason Buck, and my name's Jason. It was like, and you were big and aggressive and just going after him. So my dad will love watching this. I mean, I think there's a lot of guys that are going to be pumped to hear.
It was the great defensive years at BYU when we were known for defense and not quarterbacks.
Absolutely.
It was a great time.
Yeah.
Maybe the Iron Curtain. Iron Cougars. So, listen, Jason had a wonderful career at BYU. He was, I'm just going to read a few things so I don't get off track here. Outland Trophy winner, 1986.
Yeah.
Right? And drafted by the Bengals, 1987. I think it was first round, number 17.
17th player overall.
Okay, that's kind of a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would think so.
Wish I had today's money,
especially in the 80s, I would say, because that's when men were real men.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing against all the other guys, but these guys, they played a different game.
It was a different game.
And then Super Bowl champion. So he played with the Bengals for a few years, and then went to the Redskins and won Super Bowl 26 with the Redskins.
Show us the ring. Show us the ring right to the camera. Look at that.
Last Redskin ring you'll see.
That's right.
Right.
That's a rarity right there because they changed the name to the Commanders. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
I don't even follow.
Nobody cares anymore.
I lost track of the Redskins.
Hail to the Redskins, brother. Forever. It'll never leave me. I am actually part Chickasaw and Chippewa Indian through my mother's family, and very engaged in protecting our Indian culture.
Incredible.
Yeah.
That's great. We'll have to talk about that a little more. So after football, look, he made sure that family was the most important thing. So he went into business, some finance, some ranching. He tried his hand at ranching, right?
Always a farmer till the end.
And again, made sure that family was number one. So if I remember right, you have 12 grandchildren.
Yes.
10 boys, 2 girls.
Yep. Heavy on the boys.
4 children, right?
It was so much fun. 4 children, 2 daughters, and 2 sons.
And he's coached, throughout that whole time. He even said he coached his daughter's softball team. So he
Yeah.
went over and helped her out. That's
Gave my
pretty cool.
daughter her time. Coached in Chicago the last 9 falls for my oldest grandsons to help get them into high school and playing. And football is obviously a huge part of our life. Married to my sweetheart for 41 years, my high school sweetheart, and raised a beautiful family.
Well, that's incredible. I think something that all of us can look up to, and we appreciate you being here today. Let's get this started.
I'm excited.
Well, yeah, we're pumped to have you. For our listeners, please make sure you're following us. The best thing, go to our website, wearethepeople.org, and sign up for the newsletter. That way we can always get you our content regardless if they ban our channels. Or you can follow us on We Are the People Utah on most places, or including Instagram. So make sure you're following us there. And if you want to support us, and always get on there and order some Patriot Punch. It's an awesome nootropic energy drink, or get a shirt. But yeah, we appreciate you guys' support, and what a time to be alive. So, I mean, here's the reason I'm excited about this, Jason, is a nation rises and falls on the backs of its men and the strength and character of its men. And we have a good mutual friend who said, "Hey, you know what? I've been talking to somebody, Jason Buckheim, and obviously knew who you were." And he's like, he's a patriot. And I'm like,
very much so.
I was like, wow, we need the voices. I mean, courage breeds courage. And I think, so much we see the woke messages out there, the woke, people in Hollywood and our woke, beta men leaders and politicians. Cox is a perfect example of that. And, these are the role models these kids are looking up to. And so it's like boys raised by women, is a big challenge, which has been going on since the 70s, is these, boys being raised by women, which don't know how to raise men. It's no fault of theirs. And then, their teachers are women, and we just have a real lack of masculine men who are leading and showing, hey, this is what's right and this is what's wrong. And now when we have some of these weak men, or even when we have meek men stand up against things, they get canceled. So people are afraid to be bold, afraid to be canceled. But I'd like to, first off, I'd love to hear your story. Like, how did you, because obviously I know you're very awake politically now, but tell us your story. How did you start to get invested and care about what's going on in this country?
Brother, my father was great at telling stories, and my mother in our home. So I grew up right away with our culture of my family and its history, of my mom coming on the Mayflower and how they fled religious persecution. I mean, this was big in our home.
Yeah.
And we were poor, we were farming, we were out there working hard all day long. And but I knew of my family's heritage. I mean, and Dad would sit at the dinner table and talk about how a branch of his family fled France as Huguenots because they were being murdered by the Catholic Church, and had to go through tunnels in England to get to the church to worship. And then we came to Nauvoo, Illinois, and then to Utah. And my great-great-grandfather was on the rescuing party for the Martin's Cove. And then my dad fought in the Korean War on the battleship Iowa. And my mom's father, World War II, Italy, and my great uncle on the Buck side was Joe Jacobson, was fought in Okinawa, and then another one, in the First World War. And this was all part of me as a little boy growing up, and heroes. And dude, my heroes were always Samson, David and Goliath, David and Joshua, and in the Book of Mormon and being a Latter-day Saint, Captain Moroni and Ammon. And I hung to those people in my life as a little boy. And, the nation I grew up loving the United States of America and every story that was told in school and history class. And so as I went through watching the Vietnam War and I was way into it, working on the farm, I'd get out and get to see some news or whatever. And I was always ashamed of those that fought against our military, spit on them, hated them. I'd watch the Watergate trials at 9 years old. And then I'm 13. I'm watching the 1976 debates between Ford and Reagan, and then Jimmy Carter, what he did. And I knew right then, even though my dad was an old FDR Democrat, I knew right then I'm a Ronald Reagan guy. I mean, I figured it out myself.
Just 17?
13. 13. I mean, I knew that was 1976. I just being taught right and loving American history and the Pilgrims and our true history, right? And the Revolution and George Washington. And, I just ate that stuff up in school, and the heroes and the leaders. And then I just went that way naturally, even though my dad was an old school Democrat, you know, and he still is to this day at 91 years old. We decided not to talk politics. But, buddy, I am very passionate about it, and very passionate about the leadership we need here, like we had as our founding fathers, all the way up through World War II, right? You know, the great Americans, the rugged Americans that left the old world and risked life and limb literally to come here as settlers and build the United States of America. It's not the illegals that are flooding across the border, or people are coming here now to, you know, suck off the teat of the government and get the wealth of America. We come from those Americans that led the frontier and sacrificed their lives and went through great hardship, you know, slept in the dirt and building log cabins to become and risked everything to build the United States of America, the greatest nation on the face of this earth. So, yeah, we do need men, brother. We need men, and I'm thankful for, you know, the old days we had farms, right? And the boys, the whole family went out and worked with dad on the farm and mom, and we were just one big family unit. And we moved from that agricultural economy, you know, to the industrial economy in the last, you know, since what, 1940s or so, when we really shifted over and then started moving into huge urban areas. And you're right, broken homes, single mothers, the feminization of our culture, and the, you know, ripping down the man has put us in a bad situation. And that's replaced with me as a football coach in the football world. And I'm a farmer, football player. You know, that's just my soul. I'll always be a farmer and a rancher and a cattleman and a football player. But on that football field, when I coach, I raise men. Personal accountability, discipline, character, sacrifice, you know, all those principles that we really need in our culture right now.
You know, this is refreshing to hear, because it's common sense, yet it's a lost feeling, a lost art. It's a lost part of our culture. And now people today, men that are considering themselves men today, are paying thousands and thousands of dollars to have what you just said that should come from an upbringing from a proper father, and from a proper household. We're paying $5,000-$10,000 to go out there and have somebody yell at us. Not me, but there's those coaches that do that because these men don't know how to be men. And so if you had that upbringing of a farm, or, you know, honestly, I think one of the best things you can do is grow up without money. It shows you how to struggle and to find the way to become a man and to provide and to protect.
You live in a world of no excuses on the farm. You get the job done. Your father drops you off the end of the North 40 and with a bucket of water and no phones back in the day, and says, get the job done. And with whatever problem you come up on, you get the job done, right? You figure out a way, you solve your own problems, you get that work done, and you're accountable for it. I'm going to control my own destiny. I'm going to control my life. I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I never knew of any. The word made up of white privilege just blows me away, because I never saw it anywhere in my life, ever. And you get what you work for.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I loved hearing you talk about kind of your perspective growing up, because I just couldn't help contrast it with today. So much of what you were talking about is, as you were growing up, it was remembering and reflecting on our foundation, remembering the past, remembering stories of our founding fathers, remembering your ancestors and the struggle they went through to get us our freedoms, an appreciation and a respect for the men of the past.
Absolutely.
And, you know, when I read about, and it's interesting because I remember when I was reading about Napoleon, I got really into him about 10, 15 years ago. And when I was reading about him, it was something that just struck me and really fascinated me. It was his like absolute reverence and respect and admiration for Caesar and Alexander the Great. And I just thought that was crazy, because in our society, we worship people in the present day. Mm-hmm. You know, we have our heroes are in Hollywood, they're on music, they're in TV, they're there now. And there's this disregard for where we came from. I mean, in fact, think about it. I mean, name a Hollywood blockbuster about George Washington.
Right.
Literally one of the greatest men of our time.
I think it's Hamilton, but I'm not quite sure that's
but that's the point. Like we're instead, what are we doing today? We're tearing down the past.
Yes.
We're tearing down statues. You talked about your father was a
Korean War vet.
Korean War vet, but he was a Democrat.
Yeah.
And the thing that's made
Dad.
you steer away from him, you said, was the things you were taught in school.
Yeah.
And I can
School and
then
church.
you compare, but you compare that to today's school, which what are they teaching? They're teaching that America was built by racism.
Yeah.
They're teaching that that the founding fathers they vilify them. That America, they're pushing the LGBT, they're queering the children.
Yeah.
So you see this massive contrast that as you're talking, and it's not that long ago. I mean, like say, I grew up watching you play football.
Right.
But it's just amazing how fast our country has shifted in just literally a couple of decades. And I honestly, I find it scary. And I also think it's refreshing. And I think that's why I'm excited about you being here, is because I think the neat thing is we are at a point where I think there is a counter-cultural revolution where a lot of these kids are like, you know what, this is BS. They're done
BS.
with the woke. They're done with what's being pushed down their throats, and they're starting to push back. But I just found that fascinating to see the contrast between the way you grew up with a father in the home, with being taught work ethic, respect for your elders, respect for your ancestors, to today where there's complete disrespect.
Well, back in the day, the old
And you're
families.
not old. And you're not even old.
Well, I'm 60 now. If I can't believe I'm saying I'm 60.
Congrats.
But, we grew up in the day where if you looked at your mom and dad crossways with disrespect, you could get cuffed right across the head and knocked to the ground, right? I mean, that was the old school, and it was done with love from my father. I love my dad. And but you were disciplined. In school, I remember my old teacher that taught me about the Pilgrims in Michigan that I loved. I mean, you think about it. This was, say, 68, 69 in there, or I'm 69. I'm like 6 years old, say. And this teacher who taught us about the Pilgrims, she was an old lady. She was probably born around 1900, right? And she's my old school teacher in the first grade. Wow. And boy, she'd take that yardstick, because I was a stinker of a little boy, right? And I deserved it, and break that yardstick over my hand in front of the class, and I just stare at her, and just take it, or go down to the principal and get the whipping on the butt with the paddle. Yeah. That was our day, and I deserved it. I was a wild kid from the farm, but it taught us discipline. But now I'll tell you, us as men, and I'm talking about the real men and real Americans, have got to proudly stand up and speak truth, right? Evil is evil. Good is good. I will choose to lead when nobody else is following. I'll be out there in front. I'm gonna do things right. I'm gonna sacrifice. I'm gonna make it happen. And that's what I tell my boys when I coach them. I say, because this is the chance for that male role model to come in strong in sports, in the football world that I'm a huge part of, and the great American game when it's done correctly and right with great men. And you raise great men that are accountable for their actions, that go out there and sacrifice and have character and discipline and just fight and bleed and sweat for their brother and have loyalty and, all the principles you want in a man, you can get in those other places like that you're not getting just in the classroom at school with the academics. Yeah. Right.
As we're talking here, I'm thinking about, how does a culture go so wrong? And I think the reason that a culture goes so wrong, number one, it becomes popular to go the other way, right? You had the Woodstock movement, you have Rock the Vote, you have all these things where all these people come in and you see the media, you see churches, you see governments and everybody else, and they make these things popular for the youth. Why it's important for someone like you to get involved, and we appreciate your involvement in this and your patriotism, is because they say, hey, if he can do it, I can do it, okay? You've been at a certain level where the kids, the young men and the young women look at this and they look to you as a role model, whether you like it or not. And I think that's one of the reasons that you were sent here, is to have that toughness in you where you can now relay that. But in the scriptures, the second most important word in there, besides Christ, is remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And God gives us that, and I don't know how many times, I'll have to look it up again, how many times God tells us to remember. So when we forget, and it's interesting, recently as I've hit into my 40s, I've had the spirit of Elijah, where I've loved to look at my history of where I came from on both the matriarchal and patriarchal side. Yeah. Because now I know who I am and what I'm fighting for, what my ancestors fought for before I came here. So I had some World War II vets. We had some Bronze Stars, some Purple Hearts. We had farmers. My own father was a farmer. So I wasn't a farmer, but trust me, it was like a farm where we lived. And what happens is that we forget. So listen, I go to the gym with my boys at night, and I love to cultivate this culture of hard work and fun. And there's a couple guys there that I was talking to. These are high school seniors. And I asked one of the boys, I says, "What does your name mean?" And he said, "I don't know." And I said, "How do you know where you're going then if you don't know where you came from?" And he said, "I'll find out and let you know." Yeah. So the boy came back and he says, "You know what? I found what my name means, and it means courage. And it's from this tribe here. And he all of a sudden, and his eyes lit up. And he says, that's one of the best lines I've ever heard. As a senior, he had never been taught that.
Right.
So you know where you came from, and that's why it's important, because you were remembering the past. Yeah. We forget the past, and we look at all these people in Hollywood as our go-to people and whatever else it may be. So I think that's why it's important.
There's a great quote that says, you can tell, I forget exactly how it goes, but it's something about you can tell a lot about a culture by its heroes. And, you look at our founding fathers, their heroes, William Wallace. I mean, they looked at, Cicero. They admired the great men of the past. And again, our culture. And I think one of the things, too, is we talk about remember. I think that's come up now several times. So I want to hit on that. Because it was actually something that was on my mind this week, too, as I was having my morning time, ritual. But remembering is paying attention. It's being purposeful where you're directing your mind. And it's because remembering doesn't just happen. It takes an effort to reflect, to think, to pay attention to something. And I think so much of the world we live in is actually designed to keep us as zombies. What is a zombie? There's nothing happening. There's no attention to what's going around in society, what's happening in my family, what's happening with my children. So much of society wants us to be zombies, to be checked out, to be distracted here and then distracted here, and then go to work and go through the routine and just as a zombie that we just go through. We go to bed, we wake up, check our phone, get our coffee, go to work, listen to the same talk radio. And I think there's something we're missing in this society, which is slowing down, turning things off, and paying attention. One, intentionally on remembering what we need to remember, and two, paying attention to what is happening around us, and is everything okay? That's the thing I love about our guest is, the people watching this are cut above, because they're the type of people that are saying, what is going on in this state? What's going on in this country? Yeah. They're curious. They want to pay attention, where most people who aren't interested in this they're just interested in picking up, watching the next game and being entertained. So I really respect that. Let me ask you this as we shift gears. You grew up in Utah. You've been all around the country.
Idaho and Michigan, Utah.
But you've seen the state of Utah, and you've seen the country. And you kind of grew up in the 80s, at least when you're playing football. Uh-huh. You look at BYU, you look at the state of Utah. Let's just talk about Utah. What are your thoughts on where Utah used to be, and this, especially think of Ezra Taft Benson and Cleon Skousen, who used to talk about the Constitution being inspired by God, that one day it would hang by a thread, and that there was no greater responsibility that hung upon members of the nation or of the church than to defend the Constitution. What are your thoughts about where it was and versus where it is now? What do you think about that? What are you?
That's my era, right? And I am a huge Ezra Taft Benson, Bruce R. McConkie guy. When I say that was my era, right? And loved their writings and their leadership and tough guys. And man, I know Bruce R. McConkie for sure loved football. He was a fighter and a warrior, because a friend of mine at BYU, Glenn Kozlowski, would go visit with McConkie like once a week because he just wanted an update on BYU. I mean, he was a tough guy, right? He loved the sport and what it did and how BYU represented the church with it. He saw that as literally an arm of influence for the church, and so that was neat. And I loved. That was Ezra Taft Benson was the prophet through my teenage years and in football years, and I'm a big believer in that. Utah back then, when I came to BYU, it was just a little college town with Geneva Steel, You know, right? We had about 150,000 people in Utah County, right? And Utah was about what, maybe 1.5 million at the time. And so, it was very much blue collar. It was kind of like Logan is now, I think. You know, it was a little college town. And people were obviously more conservative. With the influx of this population from out of Utah, they might be conservative somewhere else in California, but you know, a lot of times they're a liberal Utah, right? Conservative California equals liberal Utah. So I think we're at a point in our state where we have gone more purple or towards that area, which is really scary to me. We've got to fight this and stand for Utah.
What concerns you about what you're seeing right now in the state of Utah?
Well, I really believe the Constitution of the United States and our great republic is literally not just hanging by a thread, but not functioning right now. Washington, D.C. is 100% broken. You tell me, anybody that you talk to believes Congress, the Senate, and the House can solve any of our problems right now.
Yeah, they can't even secure our border.
Can't even secure our border, right? I mean, the greatest duty of any politician, whether it's a mayor or a governor or a president, is to protect their people, right? I mean, that is number one duty, to protect our family, our people, our constituents, our wives, our children. Why would you ever risk and allow illegal aliens to come into a nation, or anybody else? They might be drunk drivers, alcoholics. I had a great friend of mine in high school get killed by a drunk illegal alien that ran a stop sign and killed her. You know, you just rape, murder, you know, robbery,
terrorism,
terrorists coming across the border. Why on earth is your duty to protect our country? Would you leave our border open? I mean, it's the most fundamental practice of our government and what we depend on as a people. It's dumbfounding to see where our federal government is now and how it's so self-serving for the leftists that control the administrative state. 90% of all federal employees plus, right, vote for the Democratic Party and the administrative state and their power.
Well, what about when the Republicans are in? They don't seem to do much better.
Well,
can we be honest?
Yeah.
I think to me, it feels more like one big unit.
We have a bunch of rhinos, right? You have a bunch of rhinos that just are getting fat and happy and they're at their big careers. And you got maybe the Freedom Caucus and a small percentage of the Republicans that are, you know, fighting their guts out in there. But, you know, half the Republican Party at least are rhinos. So, yeah, the whole system's corrupt. And you got a president that doesn't care about the Constitution and basically, you know, tells the Supreme Court to get lost, you know, and is going to still forgive school loans. So we're going to be paying for a bunch of Columbia students, school loans.
Look at the last vote that they did with the money that was secured for Ukraine and other things. They were parading that in our faces. Nobody wanted that, and they were up there cheering. And we got a Speaker of the House now that is not listening to the people.
Yeah.
He's not listening to constituents. And these guys, and in fact, the Utah Congress people that are doing this, they're voting for the same thing.
Yeah.
They are not listening to us right now. And they believe they are beyond reproach. Yes. And they need to be
they're smarter than all of us, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, how many academia elite and especially bureaucrats and congressmen and politicians, you walk up to them and you can just see the aura of arrogance around them, that they believe they're smarter than you.
No, you
right?
go to the Capitol.
They're better than us, and they're set to rule over us and tell us stupid peasants, you know, what to do.
If you guys want to have a crazy experience, show up at the Capitol next legislative session on an issue that you care about and watch the disregard they have for the people.
Total disrespect.
Honestly, like, you want to be infuriated.
Yeah.
You go there. Literally,
they're smarter than us.
Literally,
to them.
2 years ago, they had a guy arrested for wearing a "We the People" shirt. Did you ever hear about that?
No, up at the Capitol?
Yes.
What?
No, these guys are out of
hate
control.
speech is what they said.
Out of control.
Brother, here's what
Utah.
This is what I expect out of Utah. I was a fighter my entire life. I came out of the womb to fight. And it wasn't because I read the scriptures and I'm like, I saw what Joshua did. And then I see what David does. And I see what Samson does. And I hear of my family and the rescuing party at Martin's Cove. And then when I went to school, I was hated because I was a Mormon. I was always different. And I had to choose whether to hide in the corner and be shy and not be known or fight. Yeah. So I was that.
You were a big boy.
Yeah, and I got into the principal's office a lot. Because when somebody said, you worship seagulls, you dirty Mormon scum, you hold people captive in the temple, whatever, I'm like, really?
Let's go.
Let's go. And I'd walk across the playground, I'm like, let's go.
All 10 of them.
It's a great way to settle things when you're the big guy.
I was bad. I'll admit, fighting didn't do a lot for me, but I did it all the time. Because I couldn't handle it. I'm like, you're saying, what about my family? You know, you're saying, what about my religion, my faith in God, my eternal Father, and my Savior Jesus Christ? You know, I am a Christian. Don't tell me I'm not Christian, right? I mean, you hear that all the time. In Michigan, they'd rub our heads when we went around looking for horns in our hair. You know, I mean, then I go to Idaho on the border where they had moonshine stills and cowboys in this school I went to 40 miles west of Boise, and it was just the most anti-Mormon place you could ever be in your life.
In Idaho.
And I fought. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, on the Oregon border. It was a little redneck town. I mean, I'm talking, I'd come home with tobacco spit on my back, you know, hazing. They dragged me out in the school with all the seniors and depants me in front of the school when I was a little freshman. You know, I was just going on the football team, broke my leg in a football drill, just cheap shotting me. You know, every day was just.
That's real persecution.
It was real. No, it was real.
Yeah.
They would, you know, sabotage my cars and, you know, all that stuff. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, let me.
But I fought, man.
Let me bring
and
it
that's
to
what
this
we got to
really
do
quick.
as Utahns.
What you're telling me here is you had to fight for something you believed in today.
Yeah.
Nobody fights for anything today. They just say, hey, I'm a protected class. You have to hear me is what it is. You have to say my pronouns. And especially in the culture that we live in here in Utah. I don't know the numbers, but I'm guessing it's 50-50. And we have a culture, especially through COVID, has really been enunciated. And I think it's polarized. I think you've had some that have gone, you know, in defense of things, and others that have gone into, hey, we just have to be kind and nice. You know, wear your mask, take the vaccine, march in line. You know, that culture right there, exactly, is not what's going to win this country back.
Right?
That is a culture where if evil does nothing, or if good do nothing, then evil wins, and that's what we're breeding. Mormons and Christians and Jews and all of these religious folks throughout the history of time have been trailblazers.
Yes.
Where are the men and the trailblazers?
And you put it great right there. Because, yeah, being a Latter-day Saint in Utah, but, you know, I'm a talk, trust me, all my Christian friends. Latter-day Saints are Christians, right? And we love you as our brothers, my Catholic brothers, my Baptist brothers, my Protestant brothers, my Nazarene brothers, whatever. The Judeo-Christian world that settled the United States of America and established what we are needs to stand up, right, and lead this country again. And I believe the only way we'll do it in the end is through the Convention of States. But I know people get scared of it, but I believe there's a way to do that that's even greater, right? That's still within the Constitution, but it gives the people power, because it's not going to be Washington, D.C. that saves it. It's going to be men like us and women like us of that belief, our wives and our families, Judeo-Christians that don't want our country overcome by Sharia law and, you know, a ton of radical Islamic immigration from the Middle East and just the changing of our country overall. We want to be what our founding fathers said and return and strengthen our Constitution and what their intent was and save us.
So when you go to BYU campus today, one of the things I did several times last year was I went and did like street interviews. And we'd ask simple questions. Is a trans, you know, woman a real woman? And, you know, even ask.
You're asking BYU students and they try to get all smart on you.
Yeah. And
what'd they say?
Most of them would say, yeah.
There's a trans woman?
Yeah. If you know,
it's
a
a thing?
trans woman is a real woman. And then I'd say, well, would you date one? And that always kind of caught him off for a second.
I love that.
You know what I mean? They're like, well, no. And it says, why? And then it's like, well, what, are you not gay? Or I mean, but so you look at BYU, and then they're talking, and they push the ideology with the pronouns.
Right.
They push
Right.
What are your thoughts on what's happened to BYU?
You know, I believe, and I try to teach my family, that the education is a double-edged sword, right? You know, it can defend you, help you perform great tasks, but it also can cut you, right, and cause damage. And the academia world, unfortunately, today has become overall very, very corrupt. And I'm not saying, obviously we all know that 10 percentile, maybe 20% at best that aren't corrupt. And I think in Utah, our education system's better than most everywhere in the United States. I have family that are school teachers, but man, the university even goes to another level. And the corruption at a university, and it's sad to say it happens at BYU, but it does. The arrogance of academia is a sickness. And they sit there, and I think in their bubble, and just study so long in their own little private world that they're lost to the rest of the world and to wisdom, functional wisdom overall. And so they teach these corrupt principles. I talked to a couple of players. I went to a football practice, and I pulled off a couple of D linemen there and just talked to them for a second after practice last year at BYU. And I won't name their names, so not everybody wants to be in controversy. But the boys, the young men, said to me, hey, I said, are there a lot of commies and liberals up in BYU, professors? And they go, heck yeah, there's a lot. These are players that come from conservative families, both I believe were in Utah County boys. And they were just like, yeah, it's terrible up there. There's professors, pushing this indoctrination on you and liberal right there on campus. And I talked to a relative of mine, my brother-in-law's niece, that is just a sweetheart. Her and her husband were basically the prince and princess of BYU graduates, all what you expect. And they were the same thing. Black lives matter. You don't know what it's like to be black. I'm like, whoa, what? What? Have you done any reading on Black Lives Matter, and they're Marxist and anti-family, want to destroy the family unit, and they're just pure evil?
Well, look where the money went too.
Yeah, and they're evil, right? It's all busted. Black Lives Matter is just so corrupt, and these little BYU students right in line with the Instagram and everything else, just sucked right in. And that's where you see, ever learning, right? And just not knowing anything in the end, like straight out of the scriptures. Man, buddy, when I was in Chicago coaching, Mitt Romney was running for Senate. I'm like, I'm flying out to get my vote in, because it was during football season, and I'm going to make sure I cast my vote for all eternity against Mitt Romney, because I know the guy is a snake. Right.
That was when?
That was for when he was running for Senate.
Okay.
I flew out. I flew out to get my vote in and fly back to coach for the game.
Good on you.
Because it was in the primaries. It was an off presidential year. So it was like a little bit of a pain. But I'm like, man, I'm going to know in my heart that I can see through that guy. Yeah. I mean, you got to have the wisdom and life experience to be able to go, you know what? I can look through a guys that didn't grow up in Utah maybe and grew up in Manhattan, that had a potty mouth from working in Grand Manhattan, and maybe swears and does stuff that we don't do in Utah and Idaho. But that's a guy that has my back, does what he says he's going to do, is going to go take our country in the direction that we want it to go, a true leader that's going to be in the foxhole with me, and not some passive-aggressive person that shows out here, hey, the sleight of hand, look at how wonderful and perfect I am and righteous I am. But over here, he's a snake that's about to bite you in the back.
And meanwhile, you have people in Utah thinking, oh, he's fulfilling the prophecy. He's going to be the one that saves the Constitution.
Right?
I'm like,
he's like, can you not see that he's a freaking snake from a mile away?
Weed? I mean, you guys don't see who this guy is. It's crazy.
And maybe, you know what? Maybe some of those heroes in the past in the Bible, because they didn't put it in there, but you know what? I'll bet you before they cut somebody's head off, they might have said some bad words. Maybe. And maybe that's not the end of the world that person said some bad words. But I had my wife's really good friend, super sweet woman, dear to me, to my life, but the perfect woman that's never missed a day of church. And if one of her children was sent to the principal for saying a potty word, would just think her world totally ended, right? Well, all of our sweethearts, this is one, and wonderful woman. And she's like, well, I voted for Mitt Romney, and I just thought he was a really nice guy. I'm like, well, you got to do your homework. Well, you got to do your homework.
Problem.
It's low information voters.
That's the zombie problem, right?
Yes.
We're just listening to KSL, listening to Deseret News, which honestly
and
I think
he puts
are
on
the
the
biggest
image,
problems.
and you got to do your homework. Right.
One of the things that's fascinating,
have wisdom,
that's come out recently, and I'll put the graph here on the screen. It's got a graph that's the entire picture of United States of America, and it shows each state and the degree of gender dysphoria in the past 4 years.
Oh my God!
Did you know Utah has one of the highest degrees shifts in gender dysphoria in the entire country? We are also leading the country in mental health issues. What are your thoughts on that? What's going on in Utah?
Unbelievable. That type of subject just breaks my heart. It's like we've lost all common sense. I think there's and this is a personal philosophy, but I believe our culture tends to breed some weakness when you're trying to be so nice and so sweet, right? It's like, you got way too much sugar in your bowl. It's like, ugh. It's like we're trying so hard to bend over backwards and be nice and sweet and polite to everybody. It's so kind and convert everybody to the church and, not hurt anybody's feelings, that it's gone over into some people's families as well, to coddle and to allow the indoctrination at the public schools to get in there. Social media is absolutely a big role in it, right? It's so available to everybody's kids if they're not controlling that. And you got to be ready to answer their questions. I mean, I had a 9-year-old grandson ask me the other day, "Hey, Pops, we're talking about good and evil." And he goes, "Oh, evil. Is that like when on the commercials, in the middle of the day in our commercials, is that like when guys kiss each other in the commercial?" Dude, that's in the middle of the day on kids programming now. And I said, "Yeah, son, that is wrong." And you got to be ready, and you tell them why.
But Jason, social media is nationwide. So why?
Oh, yeah.
But what's going on in Utah?
I think it's because this is just pure conjecture on my part. I don't have science behind it, but I really believe our culture is a bit passive and a bit weak, and you're not standing strong and firm for what is right.
How did that happen to Utah? How did we go from a state that is leading the charge against saying that the UN is literally, we had leaders of the church here and the leadership in this state saying that United Nations is a satanic organization. We should have nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
Standing up against, Marxism, saying that it was the greatest threat to God's plan. How did we go from a state that it was leading the charge against all this darkness?
Yeah. Which we need to go back to, brother.
How did we get here?
I believe, this is my personal belief, I believe academia gone too far. Okay, let's just take a man and take it like Cox, right? You can tell the guy is a pure academia guy. Get his wonderful education with a wealthy family.
Nice little limp wrist.
Always in control, always soft and sweet. Goes to college, gets his degree, goes right over to be, county commissioner. I'm going to be smarter than everybody else and be a, world lifer bureaucrat. And, that very effeminate type world where beasts like, men that dare to be men are just animals, right? But then take that and compare it to, let's just go back 100 years. I mean, let's go to the 1860s and 1880s in Utah, and you're digging canals and laying out water systems and, hauling granite out of the mountains and, keeping your family alive. My family stories of the Indian wars the tribes going through Logan and, and feeding the Indians when they're starving to death and, just all that ruggedness and toughness. And I just sit there and go, I want to be like my family. I will never forget where I came from. I promised the Lord I'd never forget where I came from. I promised my father I'd never forget where I came from. I promised my best friends growing up, anybody that's a mentor, a brother, I will never forget where I came from. We got to remember where we came from in our families and what they did. Do you think one of those men that were pioneers would allow his child to question his sexuality or her sexuality? Do you think it even got anywhere in a family like that? It wasn't even a thought. It wasn't even a thought. And when you had a tom girl that, wanted to wrestle with the boys when she was 10 years old and 12 years old, and she was as tough as all the boys, you'd be like, oh, she's a tomboy. That'll take care of itself. And, 10 years later, she's the most beautiful girl in town and, the best grab for anybody to marry. I mean, our culture has become so corrupt, and it's led by intellectualism, which Boyd K. Packer said flat out, intellectualism is the greatest threat to our church today. I would agree. And it is led by intellectualism and academia that takes you down that road of spiritual corruption. So then you rationalize, and it's a little more shade of gray, right? And you just move that way, and so now our culture accepts more of it, and you have more families allowing it to happen in their home instead of just being, like you said, being a strong leader of men in your home and the gospel, the love of God, what's right and what's wrong. and in the government, and in our U.S. history, and in our state flag, and on and on.
Listen, I've got friends my age that have children my kids' ages that have transitioned.
Oh my gosh!
And I knew these kids. I knew some of them.
You knew some of them.
I did. I do. And I've spoken with the parents, and what the parents told me was that they felt they had enough involvement in their kids' lives. What they didn't know was what was happening on the school level with counselors, teachers,
indoctrinating them,
peers,
influencing them.
And then
kids.
after graduation or whatever, then all of a sudden it transitioned, the name changed, and they're they them. And what's crazy to me is that the parent now has to live that lie. Now I don't know what I would do. Okay, I'm just going to say that, and so I'm giving them a pass as a parent. But so if I was to say, hey, they are right, what are they? And I said, do you have to say that? And he says, listen, if I don't say that and I mess it up, he says, I'm just trying to get my kid back right now. So, and again, I'm not going to question one parent's ability to parent versus what mine is for my kids. But I find it sad that we're even having this conversation about these kids transitioning. And I've seen a couple more on recent social media posts where they're shouting it out to the world. And again, I wouldn't do that. That's just me. But to live this lie of a fairy tale, and it's best said like this. There's 3 men on this podcast right now. And if one of us was a transgender, and in a
then
couple
there would only be 2 men on this.
That's right. Yeah. And in a couple hundred years, and we're still sitting here, and there's just bones in these chairs. The archaeologist is going to come along and go, looks like there were just 3 men.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And that's what we need to boil down. This is
two men and a grown-up boy.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is a fairy tale. It is make-believe. It is makeup. It is clothing. And I don't care what anybody tells me. It's wrong and it's evil.
Totally wrong. Completely evil. It should be absolutely 100% against the law for a teenager, anybody that's not an adult. And I would cut that line, honestly, that around 21 years old, that's fully developed. Because they say, your brain develops till around 24 or so. Yeah. I mean, full maturity and intellect and some wisdom. And if an adult above 21, in my opinion, would be, and they want to go change themselves,
go for it.
Yeah,
go for it.
But
live and let live.
Our freaking kids alone.
Leave my family alone. Don't
that's my problem.
Yes,
it's
leave us alone.
That's where it's like, look, it's one thing to be.
Leave the children alone.
If you want to be gay, good on you. I don't care what you do in your own private life.
Go do your thing and be happy. But as an adult.
But this drive to push it on our kids, the drag shows, and the teachers pushing it in their schools, and into our literature, into our movies, into our commercials. We have members of the Utah School Board who will sit in here and talk about that there is an agenda to queer our kids, to push the the surgeries on our children, and to hide it from the parents. Like that is literally happening in our schools in Utah.
That is a crime.
And here's the thing that pisses me off. The Deseret News and the Salt Lake Tribune, like we have these Natalie Klein, these school board members who will come in and scream it from the rooftops in here, warning people. And you know what the Deseret News and Salt Lake Trib, of course the Trib's going to do that, but KSL and Deseret News, they will slander the school board members who call out the corruption.
They did. Are you kidding?
They call them out because they do not want to wake you up to realize there's problems. Their whole MO, you talk about Utah being, we are a subverted state. And that doesn't happen on accident. You don't go from where we were to a state leading the country in gender dysphoria on accident. Yeah. There is things going on, and that doesn't just happen. Especially a state like this.
It needs to be crushed. And the church should step up. Honestly, they own they own Deseret News. They own KSL. But they just hired.
Look at their communications director.
That's what
he's not just a part of the UN and a huge fan of the transgender, and he's an activist.
Yep.
He is literally an activist. We've done a whole show on it.
It's so hard for me to believe.
No, look at BYU. I mean, look.
It's that academia world, brother. I'm telling you, the intellectuals.
Utah is in trouble.
It's the bureaucrats, and it's just a whole nother class that believe they're like the nobility of old Europe, that they believe they're smarter and more intelligent than all mankind. That we're, if there's anybody that doesn't have their level of intellectualism and
Sadducees
degrees,
and
and they're
Pharisees.
just peasants below us. You know, they're so much better, and they live in this world in their mind and everywhere else, and that's how they.
Oh, they believe it.
But it breeds that stuff that they allow into that. Because why would you ever let a 12-year-old or promote a 12-year-old to go alter their body when they could turn around 5 years later and go, "What? I was being dumb." It's, I mean, why not maybe some counseling, right, to help them through that time, and when they're adult, they can make its decision. But for somebody to allow a body to be changed in a teenager or young 10, 11, 12, whatever, underage, that is a crime. As a crime against humanity,
They can't vote.
and a crime against people.
They can't carry a weapon or a sidearm. But yet
don't have a driver's
the ability
license.
to
Smoke a
do that.
cigarette.
You can't smoke a. You can't even.
But we'll let you mutilate your
that's
body.
okay.
Mutilate
Go
your body.
Go ahead.
So
Unbelievable.
we're going to start wrapping this up, but how do we turn this around? How do we turn it around? What do you think is going to take to start turning this around?
You know, there's got to be a breaking point, and when I say that, you know, there's it's got to be a revolution that is of the Constitution, right? It not violent, not, you know, that anything like that, but it's got to be the old Americans, and I call them the old Americans, or true Americans is what I call them, is that those people like us that love their family, that love their history, that love the Pilgrims, that love George Washington and James Madison and Adams and Franklin in the Civil War and World War I and World War II and everything that our country has done to be the greatest nation on the face of the earth. It is those Americans, for literally when you look on that red-blue map, right, that red America that's still out there, small-town America, that knows this and has a true love of the Constitution of the United States and how it should be. They want to strengthen it and make it even, you know, stronger to not be corrupted like this. It's up to us to save it, and it's going to take an uprising of those good people through the Constitution. And I think the Convention of States eventually, where we come in with the answer, not a big conundrum of a thought and everything else, but we come in with an answer, present it to the states, and give that presentation to the states and get them to ratify it. And heck with Washington, D.C. We're going to fix Washington, D.C., and it's going to be guys like us and women like us, people of the same thought, real, true Americans. And we're there to where we've got to do it.
Tell us, and as we start to wrap up, if you have some advice, because I know the reason I wanted to bring you on here and I was excited is I know you've got a lot of fans here in Utah and outside of the state, young men, you know, our age that just been a big fan of yours. Men that think similar, but maybe they're not out talking. They're afraid to get canceled. They're afraid of, you know, the woke mob coming after them. If you got some advice to the men out there that are watching this, what would it be?
Boy, you know, well, I say to all men and young women.
I want men.
For that matter. Yeah, men.
Because guess what? The women are stepping up.
Yeah.
The women are the ones showing up at the
Sometimes
school board
better
meetings.
than us.
The women are the ones stepping up at
Right.
the school board meetings. The women are the ones that are on the domestic terror
There
list.
are more men than the men.
It's, when I go to the Capitol,
Yeah.
it's the women there. Exactly. There's only a few men. So I want you to talk to the men because the fact of the matter is, nations don't rise and fall on the backs of the women. It's rises and falls on the backs of the men.
Yeah.
And that doesn't does not negate the importance of women. But we have a crisis right now of men, and the women know it too.
Yep.
So what advice do you have for the men? Or again, these guys are going out to these what are these things trying to learn to be men because they know they're not.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. I'll tell you, I will say this to all men out there and all young men. You got to choose right now to be a leader. You got to lead your wife, your children, your family, your state, your country. You got to choose right now to be a great father. You got to choose to be a leader at business and work and at church. You got to choose to be a good versus evil and make a stand and not be afraid to say it. I mean, you're going to take arrows in the back. It is not popular to be a leader. Oftentimes, I mean, so many times in my life, whether it was about talking about my religion and defending it or football and defending my dreams of playing the NFL, I was laughed at, I was spit on, I was hated. I've been hated for making stands for BYU and how they recruit in recently and been blackballed by friends. And I mean, you're always paying a price when you stand up, but stand up and do what is right and pay the price, because it is going to be good, true American men to save the United States of America, that return people to the fundamentals of our nation, of our Constitution, and the true principles of the Constitution, of following God, our Creator, and our Savior, Jesus Christ. And stand for that. Stand for truth. Stand for what's right. Get in the face of evil and say it is absolutely wrong to allow biological men in our daughters' bathrooms and in their sports, and just breaking the law and allowing our borders to be open, risking the lives of our very wives and children in our nation. What are we doing? We've got to stand up and be Americans and lead our families.
Awesome. Awesome. Tom, what do you got, brother?
Well said, Jason. You're firing me up over here.
I love it.
Hey, I'm always good for a football talk, man. We'll go out there and kick some ass. I can tell you that.
I may not be as big as you, but
Lavelle Edwards would always tell me to settle down. No. It was so funny. Lavelle pulled me in his office. Jace, you can't be so intense. You gotta settle down. I'm like, Lavelle, that's offense. The offensive guys don't get up for the game. The defensive guys are animals.
Yes.
You gotta have the intensity. And he'd be like, all right, Jace, just do what you want.
Attack.
Made for war.
Yeah.
We are in war.
Yeah.
Like I said, I may not be as big as you, but I'll tell you what, my spirit's right with you.
I'm right with you.
Kindred spirits. And,
Yes.
I was born a fighter, and even in my own family, and I love my siblings to death. They always tell me, Tom, you gotta calm it down. Why are you so fired up about this? You need to have a little bit of a different approach, and at times I do.
Well, we wake up one day with an open border with 50,000 Chinese military-age men in our nation and Middle East people, and then all of a sudden we have an October 7th. Yeah, then everybody's going to be like, what happened?
Yep. And a military that is as weak as it's ever been. Not to sidetrack. Anyways, go on.
No, it's going to take
we're
real
in a scary spot in America.
I agree, and that's why, again, having you on today is great, because I want the young men out there and really the men that are my age, our age, to step up, because a lot of the problems that we're having with the children, when I say children, I'm talking early 20s, teens, and the ones that are still up and coming, is because they had weak fathers. Let's be honest.
That is exactly it.
So if the fathers can then start bringing it back and saying, look, number one, let's turn this country back to God. Let's turn our thoughts, our prayers, our direction, and everything that we do, let's turn it back to our Creator and give thanks. And then what do you want me to do? How can I be a good father? How can I raise these children? And even if they're out of my home, how can I be an influence for good? I know you have a big influence on your kids and grandkids.
Yes.
They see you, and they will until the day you die, and then even beyond that. You'll speak to them probably volumes beyond their grave. I know my father does. And if you can give your kids, one thing, again, it's that time and knowledge, that wisdom of God loves you. You're a child of God. You were born for a certain purpose. We're not here to be overtaken by Satan, by the adversary. Yeah. And that's what's happening. He's great at playing games. And everyone thinks that, okay, when you're nice, guess what? When you don't do anything, evil wins.
Yes.
And again, bringing it back to remembering. And again, I think that's an important part of this podcast right here. Giving a vigilant and valiant effort in remembering who you are, why you're here. What are you doing instead of just getting up at, 6 in the morning, getting your oatmeal, going to work, coming home, punching the clock, doing the same thing, turning on your social media, maybe doing your church calling. Why are you here? What is your purpose? Your purpose needs to be greater. And men should always ask this question of themselves. My purpose needs to be more. Now, if you've accomplished something in your life, great. Now go do more and get uncomfortable again. Yeah. Because you're not going to grow and you're not going to inspire the next generation to get uncomfortable and to grow if you're not uncomfortable. So I think at any time in our lives as men, we have to continue to ranch and farm and to keep people single to the glory of God. If not, guys, and we're distracted with these phones and with everything else, with bread and circus. As Nero watched Rome burn, he's fiddling.
Yeah.
And that's what our politicians are doing. But we can stop it when the many stand up to the few, and it only takes an irate minority.
That's right.
3%. We will win.
Yeah.
That's my final thought.
We got more than that.
I love it. I think that's it. It's I think kind of the underlying theme today is remembering and paying attention. And it's listening to something on Jordan Peterson this week that kind of pulls all this together. And he's talking about dragons. And dragons are one of those things that goes throughout history. It's this idea that's based on reality. It's based on truth, right?
Yeah.
Even though it's metaphorical. And dragons exist. And what are dragons? Dragons are the things that start small, and if we ignore them, they get bigger. And if we ignore them long enough, they destroy us and eventually our civilizations. And that it's human nature not to want to look at dragons. It's to want to leave them in their cage and avoid them and pretend they're not there and be zombies and let's pretend this isn't happening. But we have dragons. And right now we have a dragon, I believe the greatest dragon that has ever lived on the history of this planet. And it's a tyrannical dragon. And I think one of the things, you think as a boy, there's a story that captures us, which is the knight that goes to slay the dragon. Because deep in our hearts, we know as young men that's our responsibility, is to slay dragons, because dragons will destroy us if we don't. And I think we have been so distracted by, as this zombie society, that we have allowed this dragon. And I think that is the key, is to remember to pay attention. What is happening in our borders? What is happening in D.C.? What is happening why is there war on our streets? Why is this LGBT movement wanting to decolonize America? What does that mean, decolonize America? What's behind Black Lives Matter and the LGBT movement to decolonize and deconstruct the patriarchy? What is this? I mean, that's the thing, is there is a dragon. There is something going on here. What is going on with the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, is with us moving towards central digital currency. There's a shift coming. There's a dragon that is clearly at our doorsteps.
Yeah.
And the role of the man, it's been in our hearts since we were boys, is to slay that dragon. And when you slay the dragon, in the story, in the archetypical story, is you then save the woman. Who is the woman? She's what brings life into the world. Because it is on us if we do not slay this dragon, because there is a dragon. And that's the thing, is if people don't pay attention, start looking at all these things and stop just listening to the news, the propaganda, we have to slay this dragon, because if we do not slay this dragon, it will destroy our children. It will destroy our civilization. And it is on the verge of doing it. And the reason I want you here, the reason I talk to our men, is that's you that slays dragons. Don't send your wife and your kids out to do it.
Yeah. Yep.
Where are the men? Like, at what point do men, when we show up at the Capitol, why isn't it 10, 15,000 men that care enough to our governor, who is using pronouns and pushing transgender surgeries? Like, are we okay with that? Like, whose responsibility is to stop him?
It is us, brother.
And I think everyone just wants to negate that responsibility and turn away from the dragon, but that dragon is not going away, and it is only going to get bigger. And if you look at history in the last 100 years of Marxism, 100 million people were butchered in top-down, bottom-up revolutions that we are literally on the verge of the trigger being pulled. So to our listeners, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir. I mean, our listeners are freaking rock stars, and I love our listeners. But here's what I'm going to ask you guys is, and this is why I want Jason Buck here, is because this is not, he's out of the echo chamber. The people that respect you, they don't understand. A lot of them have not been paying attention to the dragon. They are not remembering. They're caught up in the zombie world, and they're not sure which way, what's wrong with flying these flags. They don't understand the dark underbelly. So what I'm going to ask is to our listeners, I would love if you would get up and publicly stand up on a podium and say, you know what, there are two genders, and a trans woman is, a man is always a man. And, truth is eternal.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the courage to do that, which, you know what, I get it. You were sent for this time. So what can you do? I'd encourage you to start standing up for truth. But if you can't do that, you can take this show, share it with 10 people. Do you have the courage to do that? And you don't have to say, hey, I believe all this stuff. Just say, wow, do you see this Jason Buck? He's got some interesting things to say. What do you think about it? Get this information out. because we are in a very dangerous place in this country. And that's our whole show. Purpose of this show is to get people to turn around and look at the war in their backyard. That is a war you can win. DC is become the swamp.
Corrupt.
It was never meant to be this, but we can win our backyard. And when you've got a backyard like Utah, that is literally, this is ground zero. And if you don't understand, go back and start watching our shows, and you're going to see you will have your jaw dropped at what's happening in the state. And I will tell you this, the war is happening, and we need you guys in the fight. So I'm going to encourage you, if this is your first time listening, get involved. Start figuring out, learn the battlefield. Who's the good guys? Who's the bad guys? Who needs to be cleaned out in this state? This is where you can be effective, is in your backyard. You can't be ineffective in DC. And I'll tell you, as much time as we spend in CNN and Fox News with all the garbage at DC, it is useless information because you cannot do anything. But the information you can know about your school board, what's happening in Payson, what's happening with your governor, what's happening in your city council, what's happening in your county commissioners. If you're in Utah County, you would be crazy to know how corrupt these people are. That's a battle that you can win. And we need you guys in that fight. So you brought it up earlier, the whole, saying that the Constitution be saved when it was hanging by a thread. It's a thread.
It's a thread. It's beyond a thread.
It is like, we are one crisis away from seeing this country set on fire.
Yeah.
That means if it's going to be saved, it's you people that are going to do it. It's not us. We're just playing our small part. And I'll tell you, this is the time. And this is why we are here. When the final scenes wind up and we're on the other side, no one's going to say, well, how much money did you make while you were down there on Earth? And what kind of car did you drive? Tell us about how, what your successful career. You know what they're going to talk about? And to us, you were in the greatest battle of all time, the great unwinding scenes. What role did you play?
And brother, it is us as Utahns should be standing at the top, right? Setting the example, telling the truth, doing what is right, saving the Constitution, acting like the United States should act right here in Utah. It should be us doing what is right to save the United States when it's all unraveling and falling apart. They should be coming to us, right? To set the standard, to choose what is right, to be the leaders, to stand against wrong and to stand against evil in every form. And we need to do it here.
100%. And when you guys see warriors like this, the reason we love warriors, the reason we love football is because it reminds us that we are meant to be warriors.
Yes.
The warrior you're meant to be is not on a football field. Although we have some great warriors. It isn't even, I'll tell you the warrior you're meant to be. It is the warrior in this fight. And honestly, it is time to pick up that sword and fight. And it is the sword of truth. It is the sword of truth. It is. Which is the Logos. So thank you for being here, Jason, Tom, freaking beast, as always. And you guys, listen to that pull in your heart, that voice inside of you, because I know it's there. I know when you hear this stuff, there's something inside you that says, that's been yearning to stand and fight because you were sent for this time. Listen to it. Obey that voice, not the voice of your freaking governor or the voice of all the people that say disagree better. Stand up and fight. So thank you guys. God bless you guys. God bless America. And may he please bless Utah.
Right?
But we need
Utah. And all those
we need his blessings.
All the knives in the back, man.
Yes.
When we stand up, there's a lot of people that will come after us.
Yeah. Amen, brother. Thank you guys.